All right, so on today's Better Than a Lecture, you've got me, Dwayne, your host, and we're sitting here with John McEwen, who is the GIS manager for a disaster consulting company.
Yep.
Hey, I said that right. And we're going to learn a little bit about GIS in the real world, its uses once you get a degree, because sometimes you're in HSS and you've got that anthro degree, you've got that geography degree, and you're like, oh, I can't find a job. Well, with a couple of GIS classes, you might be able to. So, John, what do you want to tell us today?
Well, I can start with how I fell into being a Geographic Information Systems professional. And my story doesn't really happen to be unique. A lot of my fellow GIS professionals didn't go straight into the world after college being GIS professionals. It's something that it became a job responsibility, became something they were interested in, and they did it a little bit and they liked it and they needed to do more of it. And now it's something that they do full time. I took my first Geographic Information Systems GIS class. It was an intro class at my undergrad where I got my bachelor's in geography. And my professor, it was probably just about his first GIS class. The discipline was, I don't want to say evolving, but GIS started in the 1960s. I think punch cards, a lot of hand cartography. You had to know programming and computer languages to be able to do that. So, and also it was expensive. So there was a high barrier of entry, either cost-wise or even having those skills. And even people that use GIS, the data wasn't necessarily out there. So why would you even want to use Geographic Information Systems if you don't have data that represents roads, buildings, demographics, anything like that? But governments like the US and Canada, and now governments around the world, they use Geographic Information Systems. Well, flash forward to the beginning of this century, the end of the last century, that was when GIS became really a desktop software that people were able to use. So I found myself sitting in an intro to GIS class, and it was the only one I took. And then later I had an unpaid 1-week internship with the Jacksonville, Florida Sheriff's Office, where I was just digitizing neighborhoods for them to use for whatever crime analysis or dispatching they needed to do. I later took another class called Advanced GIS, and it was more advanced than what I had done in the past. But because I had those classes, that made me able to take other opportunities that involved GIS. When I started my master's program, I was working for the Florida State Senate as a GIS intern. I was the only GIS intern. All the other interns were people getting their law degrees at Florida State back then.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So my job as the GIS intern was to look at every Florida county and get all of their GIS data or just regular data they had on precinct level election results for all of the elections from 2000, this was in 2007, because they were getting ready to do redistricting when they got the 2010 census data. Well, since I was already collecting all this data and organizing it, one of my bosses there said, hey, you could use this data for your master's thesis. And I thought, that's good. I'm already getting paid to do this work. I might as well take the data. So I took the data, ran it through GIS. I wrote what now seems to be a very short master's thesis where I looked at historical election results data in the early 2000s in Leon County, where Tallahassee is, and 3 other counties next to it that made up the Tallahassee metropolitan statistical area. And I used census demographic data, people's age, gender, race, religious preferences, educational attainment, things like that. Used that with the election results data to understand why the counties in the Tallahassee area voted Democrat majority of the time in the last 40 years or so, when the entire rest of the panhandle of Florida, from Jacksonville to Pensacola, voted Republican all the time. I don't remember exactly what the results were, but it mattered, and I was able to get my master's degree out of it. Eventually, I went to LSU. I got my PhD in geography and anthropology. I didn't use GIS specifically for that degree, but I did use it to map some of the information on the subject that my dissertation was on. So GIS was still important, just being able to use it and understand how to manage the data for it. After that, I had my first job as a GIS analyst. I worked for the city parish of East Baton Rouge. And while I was working there, I found the time to take state election data from the Louisiana Department of State. I got the data for East Baton Rouge Parish by precinct, and I put those data on a map. That map went into what's called a web mapping application so that citizens could go to the city's GIS website. They could see the election results for their precincts for whatever election had been held going back maybe 10 years or so. That was about 8 years ago, and the city of Baton Rouge is still running that web mapping application that I set up. So I took my interest in GIS and the election results data, and I made something that people are still looking at. And I think that's really cool. And I'm very proud of that I was able to do that.
That's a pretty great tie-in from your degree to the real world.